So let's move on to the events since we're on the subject of lunatics and psychopaths. What happened yesterday at the White House? So, Zelensky came to town, and the whole affair got off on the wrong foot, I'll say. So why don't we show our friends video number 12. You're all dressed. You see that one, Rami? So
Yes.
this is this is Trump greeting Zelensky at the White House when he arrived and before the cantankerous press conference that took place later in the day. I think it's fair to say this is not a good way to start.
Ready close? How are you? Ready shut?
He's all dressed up today.
President Trump, what's your message to Vladimir Putin, sir? President Trump, you got enough. President Trump, you got a message to Vladimir Putin.
Thank you very much.
So later on in the press conference, I don't think we're going to see this excerpt. One of the reporters said to Zelensky, do you have a costume? Do you have a suit? And Zelensky stammered and stuttered and said something about maybe wearing a suit one day. For some reason, I'm not a fan of suits, but why that man keeps wearing that military outfit or that quasi-military outfit? Does he think that, that's going to convince people that he's an effective war leader when his army is being destroyed before the eyes of the world? I don't know. Maybe that's what his handlers at MI6 have told him. But I think that that whole routine has become quite tired and pointless. In any event, they go into a press conference, and I think it lasted for like an hour. And many of you will have already seen the most contentious part of the press conference. But before we comment upon it, I think we should show you what we regard as the key portion. Not the whole thing. This is a 10-minute excerpt. We're just going to show you 5 minutes. And maybe, Rami, if you can speed up the, I don't know if you're able to do this, but if you can speed up the play speed so that it takes a little less than 5 minutes. But this is really, it's important, I think, to watch this whole clip, the 5-minute clip.
States of America, and for the good of the world. I'm aligned with the world, and I want to get this thing over with. You see the hatred he's got for Putin, it's very tough.
So just so you know, Trump had just been asked, people are saying that your positions, you're aligning yourself with Putin. That was the question. How do you respond to the claims that you've aligned yourself with Putin? Trump says, I'm aligning with the world. Could you go on, please, Rami?
For me to make a deal with that kind of hate, he's got tremendous hatred. And I understand that, but I can tell you the other side isn't exactly in love with, him either. So it's not a question of alignment. I'm aligned with the world. I want to get the thing set. I'm aligned with Europe. I want to see if we can get this thing done. You want me to be tough? I could be tougher than any human being you've ever seen. I'd be so tough. But you're never going to get a deal that way. So that's the way it goes. All right, one more question.
I will respond to this. So look, for 4 years in the United States of America, we had a president who stood up at press conferences and talked tough about Vladimir Putin, and then Putin invaded Ukraine and destroyed a significant chunk of the country. The path to peace and the path to prosperity is maybe engaging in diplomacy. We tried the pathway of Joe Biden of thumping our chest and pretending that the President of the United States' words mattered more than the President of the United States' actions. What makes America a good country is America engaging in diplomacy. That's what President Trump is doing.
Can I ask you?
Okay, can you stop right there, Rami? Yeah. So before we go on, you'll note that what has happened thus far is Trump and J.D. Vance, the vice president, are responding to a question from the media. For some reason, Zelensky decides that he is going to debate with them in front of the media their response to the question. So this is what Zelensky has to say.
Okay, so he occupied our parts, big parts of Ukraine, part of East and Crimea. So he occupied it on 2014. So during a lot of years, so I'm not speaking about just Biden, but those time was Obama, then President Obama, then President Trump, then President Biden, now the President Trump, and God bless, now President Trump will stop him. But during 2014, nobody stopped him. He just occupied and took. He killed people. You know what the contact line?
2015.
2014.
2014 and 2015.
2014.
Yeah. So
I
he
was not here.
Yeah, but
That's exactly
but-
right.
Yes, but during 2014 till 2022, yeah, the situation the same. The people are been dying on the contact line. Nobody stopped him. You know that we had conversations with him, a lot of conversation, my bilateral conversation, and we signed with him, me, like a new president. In 2019, I signed with him the deal. I signed with him, Macron and Merkel, we signed ceasefire. Ceasefire. All of them told me that he will never go. We signed with him with gas contract. Gas contract. Yes, but after that, he broken this ceasefire. He killed our people and he didn't exchange prisoners. We signed the exchange of prisoners, but he didn't do it. What kind of diplomacy, J.D., you are speaking about? What do you mean?
I'm talking about the kind of diplomacy that's going to end the destruction of your country.
Yes, but if you
Mr.
are
President,
not
Mr. President, with respect, I think it's disrespectful for you to come into the Oval Office and try to litigate this in front of the American media. Right now, you guys are going around and forcing conscripts to the front lines because you have manpower problems. You should be thanking the President for trying to bring an end to this conflict.
Have you ever been to Ukraine that you say what problems we have?
I have been to.
Then come once.
I've actually watched and seen the stories, and I know what happens is you bring people, you bring them on a propaganda tour, Mr. President. Do you disagree that you've had problems bringing people into your military?
We have problems.
And do you think that it's
I will
respectful
answer.
to come to the Oval Office of the
will
United
answer.
States of America and attack the administration that is trying to prevent the destruction of your country?
A lot of questions. Let's start from the beginning.
Sure.
First of all, during the war, everybody has problems. Even you, but you have nice ocean and don't feel now, but you will feel it in the future. God bless.
You don't know that.
God bless.
You don't
God
know that.
bless. You
Don't-
will not have
gotta-
a war.
Don't tell us what we're going to feel. We're trying to solve a problem. Don't tell us what we're going to feel.
I'm not telling you.
Because
I'm
you're in no
answering on this
position to
question.
dictate that.
That's
Remember
exactly what
this.
you're doing.
I'm not
You're in
dictating.
no position to dictate what we're going to feel.
You
We're
will-
going to feel very
you will
good.
feel influenced.
We're going to feel very
I'm
good and
telling
very
you,
strong.
You will feel influence.
You're right now not in a very good position. You've allowed
From the
yourself
very-
to be in a
from
very
the very
bad position,
beginning
and he
of the
happens
war.
to be right about
From the
it.
very beginning of the war.
You're not
Mr.
in a good
Brown,
position.
I
You don't
was
have
in
the
it.
cards right now. With us, you start having
not playing
cards.
cards.
Right now, you
I'm
don't.
very
You're playing
serious,
cards.
Mr. President.
You're
I'm
playing
very
cards.
serious.
You're
I'm
gambling
the
with the
president
lives
in
of
war.
millions of people.
You think-
You're
you-
gambling with World War
What do you-
III.
what do you
You're
think about?
gambling with
What do you
World
think
War
about?
III. And
You-
what you're doing is very disrespectful to the country, this country. That's
with all
back to
respect to
you.
your
Far
country.
more than a lot of people said
very
they
respect.
should have.
Have you said thank you once? This
A lot
entire
of
meeting?
times.
No, in this
Even
entire meeting,
today.
have you said
Okay,
thank
let's-
you?
why don't we
You
stop
went
there,
to
Rami?
Pennsylvania and
So, there's a lot one can say about this extraordinary exchange. I don't think I've ever seen anything like this, where not just in the American context, in any political context, leaders of a country sitting, before a gaggle of media, having this kind of a heated debate about a question of this, or any question, but a question of this importance. I'll try to, keep my comments limited on this, but the first thing is Zelensky has demonstrated in this exchange his extraordinary incompetence. These are not things, especially when you are as dependent upon the United States as Zelensky's regime is. These are not things you want to say in front of the media. You find some diplomatic language when the world is watching, and behind the scenes, you speak more candidly. So even after being the president of Ukraine for 5 years or so, he's demonstrating, I think, enormous political immaturity. Secondly, Trump is absolutely right when he says that he's gambling with World War III. In fact, if Western leaders had listened to Volodymyr Zelensky, he was calling for a no-fly zone imposed by NATO at the very beginning of the war, which would have resulted unquestionably in direct military conflict between NATO and Russian forces, which probably would have escalated to a nuclear war. He has called for the West to give him nuclear weapons. He has insisted repeatedly that Ukraine be brought into NATO as the war is happening, which would automatically trigger an Article 5 obligation on the part of NATO powers to enter the conflict on the side of Zelensky. If Zelensky had been listened to at any one of these stages of this war, we'd all be dead. That's the likelihood. There would have been a nuclear war and we'd be finished. This man is a danger to humanity, so that he can preserve his legacy and prevent Russia from absorbing perhaps 20 to 25% of Ukrainian territory. He's willing to risk the future of humanity. And he's our ally. So one other thing I want to say about this is that before I want to make a bigger picture comment about it all. You know, he made this comment to, you know, it's almost like sophomoric debating tactic. He says to Vance, have you been to Ukraine? Yeah, I don't care whether Vance has been to Ukraine. The United States probably has thousands of military personnel on the ground in Ukraine. Vance doesn't need to go to the front line himself to see what's happening there. The United States has an enormous military. It has a huge presence of intelligence officials, CIA, military personnel on the ground in Ukraine who can advise the administration about the state of the battlefield. So it's idiotic to say that Vance can't understand what the trajectory of this war is without personally visiting the battlefield. Now, before I go on, having said all of that, I have a much bigger picture comment I want to offer, but please, Rami, what are your thoughts about that exchange, that wild exchange?
Just 1 week and a half before this meeting happened between Zelensky and Trump, there was this conference in Saudi Arabia between delegations from both the United States and Russia. And part of that delegation, they came up that there should be a meeting between Putin and Trump. I believe it was supposed to be scheduled before the end of February. Now we're in March. But was seeing this discussion between Zelensky and Trump right now in the Oval Office really doesn't incentivize Trump in any way to actually bring Zelensky into these discussions and to actually take matters in his own hands and solve the ceasefire directly with Putin, Vladimir Putin. So just seeing that contrast, right, between the progress happening on the U.S.-Russia side and then the role that Zelensky is trying to do. Basically, I'm assuming he came to Washington with the intention of signing that rare earth deal, right? Those resource deals that Trump has his eye on, but also to include himself in any form of future negotiations between Putin and Trump. This was a complete mockery, I believe. And Zelensky, from the get-go, from being roasted on his choice of clothing, up to him basically starting a debate in front of U.S. media. I think that.
So before we go to the Q&A, I just want to make a big picture, offer a big picture comment about all of this. You know, I have been vehemently critical of Volodymyr Zelensky for years. You know, you can go to my website, Dimitri.Lascaris.org, and you'll find an article from June 2022. So this was a few months after the invasion began, which is entitled The Churchillian Zelensky is a Western Fiction. It's a long, detailed analysis of Zelensky's record. And I concluded by saying that this man is an incompetent fraud and that all the hype around, you know, his democratic credentials was based on nothing. And at the time that I wrote this article, you know, it was treacherous, shall we say, for people to say publicly in the West anything bad about Volodymyr Zelensky. At that time, he was a rock star. They'd put him on a pedestal. He was doing an international speaking tour, going from one Western parliament and legislature to another and being greeted with multiple standing ovations. And I got pilloried for saying what I said. So I'm no fan of Volodymyr Zelensky. Now, having said that, I really found this whole interaction distasteful. While I agree with much of what Vance and Trump said, certainly not all of what they said, the fact of the matter is that Trump is partly responsible for the disaster that has befallen Ukraine. In his first administration, he sent weapons to Ukraine, something that even Obama refused to do. Obama helped to orchestrate a coup in Ukraine in 2014, but he wouldn't go the additional step of sending weapons to Ukraine. because, as he said, in this part of the world, the Russians had escalation dominance. You know, their logistical position was such that there was no realistic prospect of Ukraine winning the war, even with massive support from NATO. So he avoided that. Trump put weapons into that theater of conflict. Not only that, but Trump withdrew the United States from the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty, which was an extremely provocative move, particularly when you combine it with the position of the U.S. government, which I think Trump supported during his first administration, that Ukraine would become part of NATO. And quite apart from all of this, the fact of the matter is, even after, okay, so I'll readily, acknowledge that the Biden administration was much more responsible for the provocations and for the prolongation of this war than Trump was. But the fact is, it was the U.S. government. Whether it was Trump, whether it was Biden, it was the U.S. government. The U.S. government bears a huge amount of responsibility for the suffering of the Ukrainian people. They use the Ukrainian people. I retweeted a post that I put out 2 years ago, in February 2023, in which I said, when it's clear that this war is lost, the United States will dump Ukraine faster than you can blink an eye. And folks, that's exactly what's happening now. It was entirely predictable that would happen. This is exactly what happened in 2021, when after 20 years of brutal warfare in Afghanistan, the Americans bailed out. They ran away from Afghanistan with their tail between the legs. And what happened? Their proxy was overthrown. The proxy they backed up with huge amounts of Western money was overthrown in a matter of days, and the Taliban returned to power. They did the same thing in South Vietnam when I was a young man. So this was entirely predictable, people. The United States is responsible for the suffering of the Ukrainian people as much as anybody, and they have an obligation to rebuild that country. They're not the only people. I believe the Russians as well. I think a big chunk of that $300 billion, which the Russian state funds, which the West froze at the outset of this invasion, should be allocated to the reconstruction of Ukraine. I've been saying that for years. Let's be humanitarian here and recognize that this country has destroyed and that there's a lot of blame to go around, and it's time for us to rebuild that country. But what is Trump doing? While telling us that he cares about the Ukrainians and that that's why he wants to bring this war to an end, he's insisting that the Zelensky regime, which has no negotiating leverage, basically hand over hundreds of billions of dollars of mineral wealth to the United States government in exchange for nothing, This is Trump is saying, well, we're just going to recoup our investment. This is not an investment. Your government destroyed Ukraine. You used Ukraine in order to try to destabilize Russia, dismember Russia, and bring an end to the government of Vladimir Putin. That's what you did. That's what your predecessor did. So this agreement, which I've read, some of you may know that in the last few days, Zelensky's regime and the Trump regime, which is what we should call it, agreed to a deal which would see Ukraine put 50% of the revenues from future mineral wealth, and not just minerals, it's not just rare minerals, it's all of Ukraine's natural resources. Read the agreement. You can find it on the internet. 50% of the revenues from the exploitation of all of Ukraine's natural resources in perpetuity. There's no time limit on it. There's no dollar limit on it. Okay? And the United States, I'm going to read to you because, what Zelensky has been saying in response to the demands that he signed this agreement is that in exchange, the United States has to give security guarantees. Now, I don't want the United States to give security guarantees because I think that's basically just a substitute for NATO membership, and that's going to get us into World War III eventually. But it is nonetheless a reasonable position on the part of the Ukrainian government that if you're going to give this massive amount of wealth to the Americans, a country that is absolutely destroyed and needs hundreds of billions of dollars to be rebuilt, it has to get something meaningful in exchange. So what does this agreement say about security guarantees? This is the language I'm reading verbatim. The government of the United States of America supports Ukraine's efforts to obtain security guarantees needed to establish lasting peace. Participants will seek to identify any necessary steps to protect mutual investments as defined in the fund agreement. That's it. That's what Ukraine is getting in exchange for signing over to the United States what could amount to hundreds of billions, even trillions of dollars of natural resource wealth. And we are to believe that Trump's motivation for bringing an end to this depraved proxy war is the well-being of the Ukrainian people? If you believe that, I have a bridge to sell you, my friends. This has nothing to do with the well-being of the Ukrainian people. Trump could not give a damn about the well-being of the Ukrainian people. Now, again, I repeat, whatever his motivation may be, I hope he succeeds in bringing this war to an end for the sake of us all, and particularly the Ukrainian people. But no one should have any illusions that Trump's motivation is to save or protect them. This is all just a business transaction which he wants to enter into to enrich himself and his oligarch friends like Peter Thiel and Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and the rest of those greedmongers. I'm finished ranting now, Rami. Before we go to the Q&A, you want to add anything?
Well, first of all, I think, Dimitri, this was all very, kudos to you, Dimitri, for actually writing this article, especially in the early months of the war, when it was kind of hard to take a stance on Ukraine. But again, I think this is, as you've mentioned, a copy-paste of different cases in history. Zelensky is joining the ranks of Iraq and Libya, or maybe not Libya, but of governments that the United States supported and then pulled the plug whenever it was convenient. So it's honestly extremely sad to see Ukraine being entirely extracted of anything, any wealth it has in perpetuity, and knowing that with the compound effect of these investments and this money being drained out of Ukraine, this is going to cripple this country for decades. And one thing that we've learned in history is that bad peace deals don't really stand strong for a very, very long time. I really wish Ukraine was in the hands of a better leader. That this could have been all very, very avoided in 2014 and even in 2022.